Hey everyone, welcome to Inspired Action, the leadership forecast, where real conversations don't just sound good, they change how leaders show up. I'm your host, Kyle Pertuis, and today we've got three leaders stepping up, leaning in, and bringing the kind of insight you don't get from a playbook, you only get from experience. So whether you're leading a team, building a culture, or just trying to show up better than you did yesterday, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Everybody, welcome back to the newest edition of Inspired Action. I'm Kyle Pertuis, and I am your host here today with three incredible guests to answer this question. How do you create space for pushback without letting it hijack the momentum of your team? And I'm happy to introduce these three folks to you, beginning with Gabriela Juaristi. I got that.
You got that.
She's the owner and founder of inMIND Performance. She's a professional certified corporate coach, helping her clients identify obstacles and patterns that are holding them back from achieving their optimal levels of performance. Next, we have David Donnerstag, CEO at LeanSet. He's transforming organizations and individuals by combining proven lean manufacturing with professional coaching principles in order to bring about positive change. David also served in the U.S. Air Force for more than 2 decades. David, welcome. And last but not least, Gary Peterson, recently retired, but not really, after decades as an EVP of supply chain and production at OC Tanner. He currently spends his time advising, guiding, and mentoring, engaging teams on strategy, performance, and cultural transformation, and is an expert in all things SHINGO. And I'm not going to elaborate on that, but I am going to encourage anybody out there that's listening or watching that doesn't know what SHINGO is to check it out, because it's some pretty cool stuff. So that being said, I typically say, Gabriella, that you drew the short end of the stick, but you came in just ready to roll. So you kind of threw your name in the hat and said, I'm going first. I don't think there was any debate over it. So you must have some insight on this that we can't really wait to hear. So here's the question for you again. How do you create space for pushback without letting it hijack the momentum of a team? What are your thoughts?
I think before jumping into the how, we set up the where. Is this a meeting where we're debating, where we're exploring, or is this decisive executing meeting? That will define the how long we do the how. And the how is, when I was in my certification, I had a brilliant mentor whose golden words were acknowledge and validate. So I'd start there. You acknowledge, you validate. And then my personal favorite is understand to trust. And so if we have the time and the agenda allows, we'll dig into, is there a risk? Is there a challenge? Is there a fear? What are we working with to analyze this pushback? If there's a shorter period of time, we acknowledge, we validate, and we move, we make them feel heard in order for us to move on with the agenda, but set up another meeting or set up a time or a space where we can actually dig into that deeper. I think that space for that understanding to build the trust is where the gold is at, is where we'll find what's really causing it, why is it there, and how we can fix it, versus allowing the momentum to be destroyed with our team in our meeting.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, because I think good leaders don't avoid the friction sometimes that pushback can cause. They frame it. And I think that's what you're talking about,
Exactly.
is really, really setting the table for how we want to move forward with it. Awesome. Exactly. David, let's jump over to you. What would you add to that as far as how you might create space when pushback is occurring without letting that take over things when you're moving forward?
Yeah, thanks. Well, Gabrielle, that was awesome. I love to hear your insight on that and reminding me about the knowledge and validation. I agree with you. That's key. So thanks for the reminder. So, I was thinking about this. I was thinking, as a leader, I've learned pushback often leads to better ideas. That was kind of the pivotal learning for me. Leaders sometimes they mistake pushback as resistance. And we get in our own head and our own ego. And sometimes we respond, based off of that. And, like you mentioned, I was in the Air Force for a couple decades. So if I share a quick story about how I think really pushback came up to me and allowing that space for pushback, it really set the tone for, the remainder of my career as a leader. So if you think about, one time I was deployed to the Middle East, on the flight line where all the aircraft are generating from. It's 110 degrees. Jet engines are just kind of screaming in the background. You smell jet fuel everywhere. Um, and we had probably about 15 KC-10 aircraft, which are basically just gas stations with wings in the sky, if you will. But really, their job was to provide refueling to the fighter aircraft and support the troops on the ground that were in contact. So, what happened was, I arrived on the scene, and the same aircraft that I arrived on, the guy I was taking over for was leaving on that aircraft. He had a family emergency. So, our turnover was basically at the bottom of the stairs of the airplane. So, he gave me a quick turnover. Next morning, I had a briefing with the base commander to give the status of the aircraft. And I was like, hey, you know what, sir? We had to cancel a mission when the airplanes broke. And he's like, how long have you been in the Air Force? I said, well, I've been in about 16 years. He's like, well, do you want to make it to 20? Because I can stop that right now.
Oh,
I was like, oh man, okay, I've got to shift my thinking quickly here. This is no joke. So what I did was, I built the system. I had a system in place. I always had spare aircraft. We had zero cancellations of missions. The whole time I was there, got all kinds of awards and praises. And the metrics, they looked fantastic. And then, I learned that leadership lessons rarely show up in the metrics. I had an expediter, one of the guys that worked for me. He came up to me one day and he's like, every time we go to a spare aircraft, it creates so much extra work for our guys. It's already 110 degrees out here. They're working 16-hour days. They're exhausted. And every time we go to a spare, it's just creating so much work on these guys. So, I saw that the metrics were winning, but the people were paying the price because of that. So I thanked him. I had him come back and talk to me later about it. I was like, you know what, you're right. I apologize. I didn't realize I was creating so much extra work for these guys. I said, here we have 3 simple rules. Let's just follow this. One of them was, is the aircraft safe to fly? Does it support the mission? And then can they take off on time? And I gave them those 3 rules, which later I found kind of showed up in what was his name? David Marquette's Greatness, which is just leading with intent. So I gave him those. I gave him the trust, to decide, if we go to a spare aircraft moving forward. And I learned from this. I learned, hey, I'm not always the smartest person in the room. People closest to the work really do see reality. They see what's really going on. And pushback equals insight. That's really what I learned from it. So earlier in my career, pushback, I would take it as, something that was against me, but I learned that it's not about, the goal isn't about eliminating pushback. It's really creating that safe environment for challenge and momentum. And it's really not the enemy of momentum, but poorly handled pushback is. So in the end, I say great leaders, they really do create the space for tactful pushback. So tactful pushback is really, it's different than someone just coming up to you and unleashing their emotions. But when you create a team that is able to push back tactfully, then they can find a better way to move forward. And that was my lesson.
Yeah, that's a great story. And I think it really gives a great illustration that sometimes the best ideas show up disguised as disagreement, right? In that pushback.
Absolutely.
David, thank you. Gary, let's jump over to you. What would you add as it relates to creating that space for pushback to exist without letting it take over?
Yeah, I think both of those answers given so far, Gabriella and David, are fantastic. And I want to play off of both of them, starting with David and ending with Gabriella. If the leader's viewpoint is the opposite of what David said, if the leader's viewpoint is I am the smartest person in the room, then pushback really isn't welcome. And everybody is afraid that if they push back, it is going to slow down the momentum, as you say, as the question infers. So it's better for everyone just to stay quiet. He or she doesn't want to hear this anyway. He or she doesn't want this to slow down. They really don't want to hear this idea. So the best way to have pushback without slowing down the momentum is to have it be part of the process, to have everyone understand that this is on the table. And what everyone in this room wants from me and from everyone else is a real hard look at, well, what's going to stop us? What's in the way? What's not going to let this go right? And when it's healthy that we can talk about it, and when the leader and everyone else is agreeing, we need to do this as a group, whatever we come up with will move us and mold us towards a better solution, then that's great. Now, if on the other hand, there is not a history of welcoming pushback, then maybe, and the person needs it right now, they need to just position it well. I know historically, maybe I've been difficult when you tried to push back before, but on this is really important. I really want to hear what everyone has to say, and going to Gabriella's point, let's all listen well. Let's acknowledge. Let's validate. Let's see if we can make this better. You set the ground rules. David talked about ground rules as well. I think if people know what the limits are, uh, what the boundaries are, then it can happen without slowing things down.
Man, I love it because I think ultimately, even though the goal is not consensus, it really is about clarity and commitment.
Yeah.
What do you do in the moment when a conversation starts to really kind of derail and that begins to threaten the momentum of a team? So you're engaged in a conversation and it really starts to take a turn. Maybe you saw it coming, maybe you didn't, but that conversation alone really starts to compromise maybe the thinking of the other people that are at the table in the room, where they are going to be impacted by the choices that come out of it. What do you think?
Yeah, I think one thing you can do, Kyle, is kind of reclaim authority by saying that love it. I want to hear these ideas so that in a moment when I tell you which way we're going to go, everyone knows that I've considered all the options. Everyone knows that I've heard everything. And right now, I just want to hear the last of these thoughts, and then we can move forward. Um, and what that says is I am open, I am listening, but I'm going to make the decision here in a minute. We are going to move on. That's one thought.
Yeah, I
I
like it because I think it's a good illustration again of the fact that leaders don't just manage people. Even in that approach, you're managing the energy and the direction, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like to agree with a tiny part of it, 10% of whatever they're saying, and grab that 10%
Mm,
and hook them back to where we were. Okay, taking this,
yeah.
like you just mentioned, bring it back to where we were to sort of once again take the path where we were at without making again them feel heard and seen and everything.
That's cool, Gabriella, especially if that 10% or whatever you tap into,
Right.
the others in the room are also going to be nod and say, yeah, that's right. Um, then everybody's nodding in agreement and the energy continues on.
Yeah, be careful there.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, but it establishes maybe that slow buy-in, right? If there's a piece of it that you genuinely believe is valuable and hanging on to, I think that in and of itself is acknowledging and validating that you heard them, right? And you're open to them sharing.
You know what doesn't work? What doesn't work is getting frustrated and calling them on it. Dude, you're always doing this to me. You're always derailing my meeting. You're always the negative one. That doesn't work.
Yeah, the blame game rarely
Yeah,
surfaces as positive momentum.
that's right.
David, what do you think?
Yeah, and Gabriella really just kind of made me think again about acknowledge and validating, because that was something that I've always struggled with. But really, in very stressful moments, I've somehow conditioned myself to really just calm way down, and it's a great opportunity to acknowledge and validate, to relieve some of that tension for all the parties. But I'm very mission and objective, strategic focus. So I try to shift the thinking and the conversation back to the mission at hand. What it is, what's the problem we're trying to solve, or what goal are we trying to achieve? So, however I do that, if it's like just say, hey, let's just pause for a moment before we go deeper into the tactics here. let's realign to what the outcome is. What are we really trying to achieve here? But the acknowledge and validation point, I'm going to keep going back to that because it really is powerful.
Yeah, I like that, to recenter the focus on back on the challenge that you're trying to move forward. It's funny you say that about acknowledging and validating, because you guys, if y'all know David, he's the master at it. In fact, after Gabriella gave her answer, he acknowledged and validated her answer.
I saw it.
It's hysterical, because that's a tool, right? When you hear it, even you hear it, it's kind of clunky sounding, right? Like you got to go put that on somebody. And I think it can be misconstrued as very disingenuous if it's not something that's natural for people. And I think it takes awareness around what you're hearing. It takes being in tune with the other person and where they're coming from. And to Gary's point, man, we've all tried the blame game. Like, dude, stop. Every time we get into these kind of meetings, you shake it up by bringing your input into it. And that never lands well, right? Because all we're doing is entraining to that same energy that is driving their pushback. Go ahead, Gabriella. What were you going to say?
No, I was listening, and I think it has to feel natural. Like I said, that trust part, that understanding part, when that acknowledging and validating is kind of forced, or when you really just want to say, man, you do this to me all the time, and just those emotions are behind it, that's when it clashes with it. But I think the hard part sometimes, by being so, like David said, tactical, and so, okay, let's get on track of where we want to go, and where I want to take you, because you guys are amazing, we lose that listening, like Kyle said. And I feel that's the base of everything, being able to listen to each other.
Yeah, I like it. I was thinking about the team that I left in place at OC Tanner when I retired. I felt like when we could sit around a table, the 12 of us, and talk, it was just healthy. It was comfortable. And if I think of that as that's the type of team I want to work with, then if I'm in some sort of other conversation that doesn't feel healthy, that feels awkward and that feels strained and that people are struggling with each other, then it's a good chance for me to realize, okay, I've still got work to do with this team. There's still opportunity to kind of elevate this team and get them to the point where they can have this dynamic push against each other conversation without it feeling personal.
Yeah, that's great insight. But you guys made me think about what's the approach. We've all been in rooms where there seems to be this one confident voice that just keeps steering the ship, and they may not always be in the leadership position, right? It might be the person Gary was talking about. Hey, dude, stop doing this. But they're well known, they're well respected,
Yeah.
and they're vocal, and they're okay putting their neck out there and speaking their mind. And so, what are your thoughts on that in front of the team when that continues to happen, to keep that from maybe becoming influential, maybe after that meeting or that session or that conversation ends?
Yeah, you got to be careful that what if I'm the one who's out of sync? What if I'm the one who's wrong,
Yeah.
and I'm listening to others, I'm going, no, 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 no. So I think if I found that somebody keeps saying something different, I'm comfortable pushing back and saying, man, I love where you're going with that, but I still have this thought that whatever. It's important, I think, to look around the room and try to read the room. And if I've said my viewpoint twice and nothing is registering with anybody, I always say to myself, okay, either it's time to drop it or I need to regroup and think about a different way to say it. Um, but if I think they're wrong and I'm saying my things and other people kind of nodding with me and saying, that's a good point. I think that's when you know that it's okay to continue to kind of push against this other idea.
I think it depends on how long I've been working with the team or with the people I'm dealing with, especially in the case where, if I know others' priorities, or like Gary said, their ideas, their inclinations, I openly ask somebody else, considering what the leader or the vocal one is mentioning, how would this coordinate with your priorities, or how would you invite others to actually be part of it and see where that leads versus just have that one take off on its own.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that, inviting it in, because that quiet compliance maybe, yeah, okay, well, let's see where this goes.
And, for me, I think some of the ways I've handled it in the past, especially as I grew as a leader, was really to just listen, to really deeply understand. Because a lot of times I just don't, I have this feeling like they're pushing back, and I just don't understand exactly what they're saying, what point they're trying to get across. So it feels like it's wrong or it's pushing back. So what I've started to do was listen to understand, but then also try to figure out how to make this a win-win situation for everyone. Meaning it might not be the idea, but at least that individual feels like they're heard. And the rest of the team, we can all come together and come up with, a collaborative, solution or so forth.
David always has that calm sage wisdom, right there when you need it the most. You guys, thank y'all so much for joining us. That's all the time we have today. Everybody out there in the podcast world listening to us, we appreciate it. Be sure to check us out every Thursday at noon Central on LinkedIn, and anytime right here on the YouTube channel at MindFit Coaching. Thanks again.
Thank you for the invite, Kyle.
Thank you, guys.
Love being with you guys.
Well, that's a wrap on another episode of Inspired Action, the Leadership Forecast, where real leaders step up, get honest, and move the conversation forward. A big thanks to our guest today for bringing the kind of insight you can't fake, the kind that you earn through experience, pressure, and showing up when it counts most. Be sure to join us every Thursday on LinkedIn for new episodes at noon Central, and anytime on our YouTube channel at MindFit Coaching. But most importantly, keep taking inspired action. We'll see you next time.